Americans, how do you feel about the news that Germany, Denmark and the UK have issued travel warnings for the United States? Story 1. I'm a white male, a US citizen, and I've traveled all over the world, including the USSR back when that existed. In general, I found that border control people aren't exactly the friendliest of types, but they're generally businesslike, impersonal, and efficient about things. You show your passport, they wave you through, and so on. Except in the USA, they're inefficient, rude, and just generally unpleasant. They're like the Vogons from Hitchhiker's Guide, but with an extra dose of sadism and inefficiency thrown in. This is based on my return trips in 2022 and 2024. I'd hate to imagine it now, so I think these travel advisories are worth considering. Once you're inside the country, I think you'd have a decent enough time, but I'd suggest taking your tourism funds somewhere else for the time being. It's a big world. As Douglas Adams might say, the US needs to hang a sign outside our door, come back when we're sane. Story 2. I am sad but think it's appropriate. My company offers me the chance to move to Canada, but for less pay, and my wife would need to find a new job. Seriously considering it though. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the encouragement, everyone. Story 3. 25 of Americans will say good. This is what I voted for. Leave us alone. 25 of Americans will say good. I didn't vote for this, but if you make it hurt, maybe we'll get some actual change around here. 50 of Americans don't know about it, don't care enough to form an opinion. Story 4. Have they? In the reports I've seen, Germany explicitly say that their new travel advisories are not travel warnings. Story 5. Clarification. They didn't per se issued travel warnings. They just clarified that every paper has to be meticulously filled out and that the border authorities have the irreversible last say. Well, those papers have to be meticulously filled out because of whimsical border authorities banning and incarcerating people for no real reason. So these papers have to be so well filled out that the authority don't even start to take you out of the queues for whatever reason. But still. Story 6. Holy, this is like the 14th different "how much do you hate Trump" post I've seen pushed to my feed today. Reddit, stop shoving this in my faces. I get it, you hate Trump. Story 7. I hope more countries issue travel warnings. Actually, I wish they'd all just ban or boycott travel to the US. It's going to take a massive economic hit to get through to many Trump supporters. Story 8. The travel warnings make complete sense. They are warning their citizens traveling to the US not to overstay their visa, not to provide an accurate purpose of visit, and not to commit crimes because those will put them at risk for detention and deportation. I think that is entirely reasonable, both for the US to do and for countries to warn their citizens to not do while abroad. Story 9. I mean, it's justified, but it seemed to me it's all the same stuff that applies to Americans when we go to Europe or any other country. I don't understand why following a country's immigration laws is a big deal, especially since it's not really news when other countries kick out people who are illegal. Story 10. The warning issued was a reminder to obey the US immigration laws, because they will be enforced. I don't have a problem with that. As an American, whenever I travel, I wouldn't even think about around with the local immigration laws. I'm a guest in their country. The least you can do is follow their laws, so I don't know what's the big deal is. Story 11. They're right to do so. I've looked into leaving the US, since the Trump administration has made it pretty clear how they feel about Latinos. Sadly, I don't think I'll be able to. And to the Latinos that voted for Trump, you sold us and yourself out. You bastards. Ashamed. We used to be looked up to, respected, admired. We were the status quo. Nations used to trust us to defend them and give aid when needed to. Decades of progress down the drain. Pissed away. Now they want to take our SS and benefits. It's a shame. What are we to do when we have to work 40 hours just to scrape by while the billionaires ride their giga yachts? We can't organize because everything is about sports, genders or politics. We lost the Cold War. FSFS. I feel tired, boss. Free Luigi. Story 12 makes sense to me. If immigration officers are deporting people because they badmouth Trump on social media, it's not a safe place to visit. Oddly Russia-like, in fact. Story 13. I live here and I don't feel safe anymore. I actually am renewing my passport just in case, and I did not feel safe mailing my old passport and my birth certificate off to my government. Literally wondered if they would just keep both and stop renewing passports. I ordered a new copy of my birth certificate and I am waiting until I have that before I apply. Unfathomable that a native-born American citizen feels this way. I don't think my fears are unfounded or illogical. The inmates are in charge of the asylum here. Political unrest, several separate disease outbreaks, and multiple reports of foreigners being unlawfully detained by US law enforcement. I certainly wouldn't want to travel to a nation experiencing those things. Makes sense other governments would advise their citizens to avoid doing so. Story 14. You ask the average American. Probably don't care too much. But Reddit will have you see the answers of the most self-hating people out there. There are so many issues to fix in the US, but you'll have white people thinking they live in a third world county on this site, huh? Story 15. Good. It's not safe here. Accidentally get the wrong visa, and you're likely to be detained for several weeks, or have brown skin and a tattoo and you'll be sent to the gulags in El Salvador. Story 16. My wife works in HR at an American law firm with offices in several countries. Right now they're trying to figure out what to tell employees who have to travel for work. I wish them luck figuring out better advice than don't. Story 17. Honestly, do not care, as do a majority of the people in the US. Reddit is not a good barometer of what the US thinks. It is a leftist echo chamber where mods and admins go out of their way to squash any different viewpoints. Story 18. I spent 20 years in the travel and tourism industry, and from the time of Trump's first presidency, I felt the USTA needed to have checked Trump. Our inbound travel numbers had started to slide then. These CEOs knew better than anyone how much international travel meant to our economy. As a whole, the travel industry said nothing. Now in the last month or so, they said something that kinda sounded like criticism, so they deserve all the cancellations that they are now getting. Hey race, what most non-travel industry people don't realize. We Americans need tourism dollars. In a country that imports a ton of its commodities, tourism is the one true US export. Tourism is also one of, if not the biggest income maker in the country. It is also the biggest employer. Those hotel and tourism employees buy homes and cars. They go out to eat, they have babies, they are huge purchasers of fashion and tech. When tourism suffers, everybody suffers. Shame on the entire tourism industry for staying strum for so long. Story 19. It is absolutely justified. Story 20. Unsurprised. It's sad how far we've fallen, how incredibly damaged our international reputation and credibility have become, in just 2 months, but millions of us saw this coming and unfortunately couldn't stop it. Story 21. We're like raving lunatic rabid dog with a gun who thinks the earth might be flat levels of crazy on the world stage lately, so I don't blame anyone. Story 22. They should be even more cautionary. The fact is that the new Nazi regime running our country is currently engaged in kidnapping foreign nationals and selling them into slavery in El Salvador. That is not an exaggeration or euphemism, it is the literal truth. Do not come here, do not spend money here, do not buy American goods. Wait until our country removes the Nazis. It may take a while, and hopefully not involve violence, but I think that might be inevitable at this point because, based on historical evidence, the only way to remove a Nazi infestation is with overwhelming force. Story 23. Who cares? They aren't going to ban American travelers. Half of the towns there rely on tourists for large portions of income, not just Americans too, and they aren't going to actually stop their own tourists, because a lot of Europeans still visit the US. This is just a stupid publicity stunt because they don't like Trump. They're basically just saying, oh, be careful in America, oh, which is fair. You can dislike Trump and take political shots at him all you want. He makes himself a good target. But at the same time, don't make empty threats and statements. Either do something tangible, or be quiet. Story 24. As a Canadian, I couldn't blame any country for doing so. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the biggest mistake he's made is picking on Canada. Like, what the have we ever done? Support the USA in everything it's done. Sure, you're bigger and stronger and have the guns, but otherwise what do you really have? The rest of the world sees this and just is in shock. I mean, have you ever heard Canada being involved in a conflict they started? But we've always been there for ones other people have started, to help. It's what we do, it's what the human race should do. I just wonder when our neighbors to the south are gonna break and have all-out civil war with each other. You never need be worried about us. But when the day comes hits the fan with us, the whole world is on our side minus maybe 2 countries. And those 2 don't like you either. As I say this, I'm not speaking of the citizens. I'm speaking of the direction your government has taken and those who choose to support it. How can you be so blind? This isn't a movement not buying American or not traveling to the USA. This is a new direction for us. It won't be stopping. Pretty sad when the only country we have to worry about is USA. Story 25. I've been to the US a few times for work, and the whole immigration process has always been absolutely ridiculous and arrogant compared to entering other countries. As if the US were a sacred paradise into which every single creature in this universe tries to enter illegally. When they started searching laptops and cell phones, I stopped taking my devices with me, not because I had anything to hide, but because I believe no one has the right to snoop into my private life. WTF, you having a laptop or mobile with you? What do you have to hide? Are you a terrorist? That's how they reacted. Based on these experiences, I decided to stop working for clients in the US. But the real kicker came when I dropped my sister off at the airport. She regularly visited friends in the US for a few years, at least twice a year, so I took her to a large German airport to help her with her large suitcases. In front of the empty American Airlines counter, an employee yelled at me from 20 meters away, telling me to stop immediately and not move. I could already see myself lying on the floor, bound and gagged in a German airport. My sister showed her proper papers after all. It wasn't her first trip. While from a distance I could understand all the questions being asked, 90 of the questions were exclusively about me, even though my sister had clearly stated that I was only bringing her suitcases and would not be boarding this flight. She was asked who I was, where I lived, what I did for a living, while I was waiting 20 meters away with the suitcases. I wanted to shout over, none of your business. Then the woman read the questions on the immigration form aloud so that half the airport could hear. Have you planned any criminal or terrorist activities in the USA, yes or no? I'm really sorry. But when I heard that, I had to laugh out loud. Of course, any terrorist will answer such questions truthfully after all. You don't want to give false information upon entry. How stupid you have to be, dear terrorist. You blew up the WC, okay, that's very annoying, but you answered the question about terrorist activities incorrectly on the entry form that carries a life sentence. The land of great freedom. Oh. The USA has never been that. I actually had to wait 20 meters from the check-in counter for over 30 minutes, being watched and threatened not to move under any circumstances. Haha, my sister, a woman in her 60s, had to pick up her heavy suitcases from me and carry them onto the conveyor belt herself. This absolutely unfriendly, arrogant and condescending behavior on German soil was the trigger for my very personal lifelong travel warning for the USA. After several similar disturbing experiences, my sister also won't set foot on US soil again. Seen this way, I can understand the border guards only criminals and terrorists could be so stupid as to want to travel to the USA voluntarily, right? A little tip: criminals and terrorists don't have to enter the USA. They're now at the forefront of government. The world is big, there are beautiful things to discover everywhere. And in no other country in the world are people received with such condescension as in the USA. Story 26. Honestly, what do Americans expect? Canadians are nasty, and he hasn't said anything positive about any country. Impose tariffs, broadcast the whole criminal to jail show. What exactly is expected of other countries now? Story 27. It's just a political showmanship that won't deter people who have business or family relationships from traveling to the country. But nobody could say that it's not based on the political representation behaving like deranged lunatics. Story 28. I think it's very appropriate. There have been several Europeans who have been detained or worse for nothing at all. We are so up right now. I'd avoid the US at all cost if I wasn't a citizen. Story 29. You must meet entry requirements is not a travel warning. That's literally all the UK and Germany have said. Germany even went so far as to say their release was not a travel warning. So what are you on about here? Story 30. I think if you Europeans and Canadians truly care about us Americans even a little bit, you'll do everything in your power to make the consequences of this administration's actions as painful as possible. As quickly as possible. Pain, personal pain, is the only thing that is going to get through to MAGA, and non-MAGA won't be spared. If the spell is ever going to be broken, we are all going to have to suffer, but the fucking fog of delusion is so thick. In the beginning, I thought, surely everyone sees this, they don't though. Story 31. Not surprised. They gotta do what's best for their people. I wish Americans acted accordingly. Too many people are quiet and acting too normal, but this place had 10,000 people show up to Bernie. The US population is 333 million. We need more people to act and be organized. We are not organized. Story 32. I don't blame them at all. The US has become something I don't recognize in a short amount of time. Many of us have been and still are fighting this BS at every turn. It feels impossible sometimes when around 40 of us still support the stupid clown act of an incompetent administration, and at least 25 or so will never stop supporting this no matter what he says or does because they are just too hateful, too stupid, or too gullible AF to ever even question the emperor's fine new clothes. So yeah, if I didn't live here I wouldn't travel here either. Story 33. I'm an American citizen, and there are parts of this country I'd feel unsafe visiting, not to mention my distaste for giving them, and I'd not drive with a blue state plate in most red states. I don't trust cops on the best of days, even in my blue state, but a non-US citizen POC in someplace like WVA, forget about it. Story 34. Those warnings are not harsh enough, and more countries should issue them. If you aren't born in the US, to people who were born in the US, you should stay away as long as the Trump regime is in power. Story 35. I think it was the Denmark warning that was specifically about trans people entering the States. Unfortunately it's spot on. Our government is being horrible to our own trans citizens, so it would be a bad idea for a trans tourist to visit. Story 36. I think the world kind of needs to turn their backs to the Fourth Reich. They're going through some things and might be embarrassed. It's better if we look away. Story 37. I have family that lives outside the US. They were supposed to come visit soon, but I seriously don't think it's a good idea. I think the warnings are warranted. Story 38. Canadian here. Just wondering why my government hasn't issued one. Like seriously, after reading this story, do not care. Story 39. So what? I bet you didn't know even Canada has a travel advisory for Denmark, Germany and UK. Travel advisories are pretty common. Story 40. Good, they need to. The news right now is horrible. As bad as Trump was in his first term, this is way worse and we're only 2 months in. The Dems are hopeless. It's bad, man. I'm legitimately worried about the future of the planet. Story 41. It makes complete sense. It's obviously sad to see, but we are the bad guys here, so why anyone would be surprised governments are warning their citizens away. Wish I could get away. Story 42. I promise. The people who need to see the torrent of Americans. How do you feel about the deluge of bad decisions your majority-elected leader makes? Posts on this and other subs. Not only don't read Reddit, they also have no desire to visit other countries, respect anyone else's culture, nor do they think particularly highly of us. The other barely less than half of Americans who feel like this whole 4-year show is well out of our hands and can't do anything about it. What I'm trying to say is, if those voters could read, they'd be very upset, like the King of the Hill meme, except it isn't funny because we're living it again. Story 43. Proud of Germany, Denmark and the UK for seeing that we are turning into a country, thanks to the massive morons that voted for the worst president in the history of our nation to get another shot. Story 44. You'll get a lot of emotional responses, but at the end of the day, the government of Denmark exists to serve the Danes. If America is potentially going to roll tanks on Danish territory, then they should warn their citizens about going to America right now. I hate that it's like this, and I hope we will see our friends from Europe again at our national parks soon. We just have a cancer to fight. Story 45. Great decision. The rest of the civilized world should follow suit. The U.S. is an extremely dangerous place to be right now. Do not travel here until we overthrow that in the White House. Story 46 Humiliated, ashamed, but they are correct to issue the warnings. This is deliberate, the alienation of allies by Trump. He works for Putin and is weakening the West. Story 47 I think, those from America visiting your country should carry and show their immunization record, along with some mandatory immunizations for entry into EU. Story 48 It's disheartening to see the massive regression in this country within 2 months. It's an appropriate response due to the handling of tourists, immigrants, and alike. Story 49 You're not a criminal, but you're going to jail. My IC detention story as a Canadian citizen. Jasmine Mooney is a Canadian woman and American Pie actress who was put into jail for 2 weeks and only got out because of her social network and media attention. Read her story and you should be warned, do not go the USA anymore. One small error or one stupid person handling your entry and you're several traumas richer. Story 50 People who look like Americans and are Americans are getting deported to random counties without warning. Don't come here, it isn't safe. Oh, and if your country wants to help crash our economy too, go for it. I'm hoping my state gets sold to Canada soon. Story 51 They should issue the warnings. If I was a foreigner, I would be terrified to be here. Our government is in total chaos and the people that voted for this monster or just liable for the mess as he is I hope Germany, Denmark, the UK, and the rest of the world realizes that not all US citizens agree with the atrocities that are happening right now. I grew up in the United States, and never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that this would happen. Donald Trump, I think it is a very smart thing to do. No foreigner should visit the US or spend a dime with an American company until the Republicans are gone from government for good. It is unsafe for everyone to be here right now. Story 52 I am an American citizen and a pale as white guy. I was returning from a work trip in Europe and this was my first time traveling internationally. I was obviously unsure of the process and asked an officer what to do when I got to the front of the line. She pointed to one of the screening officers and told me to go to his station. I walked up to the guy and said good morning, and he freaked out. He started yelling at me saying, "You do not approach me until I tell you to, you do not run the show here, go stand to the side." He then proceeded to help every other passenger until I was the last person left for my plane. He then proceeded to absolutely grill me on my trip. Asking what I do for work, asking me to explain what IT means, asking me what countries I had been in. Well, it just so happens that one of the offices I had to do some work in was in Amsterdam. I made the mistake of telling him the truth that I was there for a few days. Guess who then got all their bags searched and missed their connecting flight? Thank you for your brave service, Dulles International Customs Agents. Story 53 I think it sucks, but I completely get it. Americans aren't all bad, but enough of us are bad that I think the rest of the world should avoid their money coming here when they can. My wife is an immigrant with a green card. We won't visit her family on holidays now for fear of getting IC detention centered. All her documents are up to date and she hasn't done anything illegal, but they've detained others for simply opposing Trump. We'd move to her country, but that's a very expensive proposition, and we're currently working with IVF doctors here and have things removed from both of us in medical facilities here that we couldn't travel with. Neither of us want to have surgeries again, so for now we're stuck here and I'm supremely embarrassed to be American. Story 54 Probably sensible on their part, honestly. Perfectly innocent people with all relevant visas and documents have been detained or turned away at the borders. The current regime seems to come up with new outrages every week, so who knows what they will do next. I certainly wouldn't recommend that anyone travel here right now, it isn't safe. Story 55 I live in the southern United States. There are gangs. The police are only interested in giving you tickets. You can go to jail for very innocuous actions like not having car insurance and driving, drinking alcohol outside, etc. You can buy a gun for $150 and walk out in an hour, but going to a hospital will saddle you with tens or even hundreds of dollars or debt. I don't even have to mention the school shootings we're infamous for. It is a very dangerous country full of corrupt police and mentally unstable citizens. It's not the same everywhere. Some states and areas are much more civilized than others, but I don't feel safe where I'm at. America is a third world country with a first world veneer. Behind every gated McMansion could be an impoverished slum with lost souls who sleep outside and a very high crime rate. Story 56 From what I can tell, not too many Americans not on Reddit care. I follow some camping groups and one I saw gaining traction was that hopefully campgrounds would be a little emptier. Story 57 I feel it isn't unreasonable given the unpredictability of the current government, though personally, I never really understood why Europeans travel to the USA in the first place unless they're emigrating for work. I just don't think of our country as all that interesting, tbh. Story 58 The United States makes $2 trillion in tourism a year, and we are going into tourist season. Maybe if the governors of states like Florida chime in, was kidding. The only positive is we won't have enough money to pay the military. Story 59 Disgusted that we have allowed a criminal to ruin our standing with the world. They are doing the right thing. We cannot be trusted until we oust the criminal and figure out how to prevent this in future. Story 60 I'm shocked and appalled our government has forced our longtime allies to do this. I feel they are totally justified. I'm ashamed to be an American now more than ever. We are continually hostile towards the rest of the world with our endless wars and meddling. This is disgraceful. Story 61 The thing I can't figure out is the way our IC and immigration agents are behaving. They are clearly trying to send a message. That woman who was locked up for 2 weeks from Canada had a clerical type error. Even if those officials were acting inside the law, they clearly did not have to hold her for 2 weeks. But what exactly is the message we are sending? Why would we want to off Canada Canadians so much? Story 62. It would be detrimental to their citizens if they didn't warn them about us. We have egomaniacal, fascist, hateful leadership right now, and other countries should steer clear until this passes over if it ever does. It's bad enough for our own citizens. No need to add more fuel to the fire. But if we have a revolution, I hope they support the correct side. I'm an American, and even I don't want to visit a large swath of my own country. Story 63. I'm glad their eyes are open and they're holding our government accountable of their actions. I wake up every day more terrified. The world has been able to see our government for what they are. It's impossible to get a majority of the citizens to even engage in conversation about it. I hope I can escape before it's too late. They've made it almost impossible to get ahead enough to do so. Story 64. It's absolutely warranted. I wouldn't want to come here either. Citizens like me and my family can't even exist without being harassed and getting death threats regularly just walking down the street or going to the grocery store. Why would a foreigner think it would be any better for them?